for any person to do this regardless of age. So some things that we take into account when we're working these kinds of cases is how old are the involved parties? Are we talking about like a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, or are we talking about like a 17-year-old and a 10-year-old? Because obviously the severity is a little bit different depending on the circumstances. The age of consent in Georgia is also 16. So if you see a lot of definitions having to do with a child under 16, that's why. Georgia does have what's called a Romeo and Juliet clause in most of the code sections. Most sex offenses are felonies. However, with the Romeo and Juliet clauses, there are some circumstances that could make these offenses a misdemeanor. So a sex offense could be a misdemeanor, specifically the possession of CSAM, if all of the following apply. If the victim depicted is at least 14 years old at the time the image or video was created. The visual medium was created with the permission of the minor. It wasn't taken, like recorded without their knowledge. And the defendant was 18 years or younger at the time of the offense. And their violation did not involve the distribution of the image or video that they captured. Another thing we have to take into account is, are the images CSAM? So the way CSAM is defined in the state of Georgia, an image depicting like a female child topless would not be considered CSAM. That would be considered child erotica, which is inappropriate, but not like necessarily illegal, just at face value. And then also another thing we have to take into consideration is, was the sharing or creation of this image or video consensual? Like, did the child agree to take this picture or video? We have a couple of statutes that address this. We have what's called the revenge porn statute, where we have people sharing, like both kids and adults, sharing intimate images without the consent of the person involved. Like, they might have agreed to this image being captured, but they did not agree to it being shared. That's a crime. It's usually a misdemeanor. There are some circumstances that make it a felony, though. And then there's also invasion of privacy, which is basically capturing the image or video of the minor, or of any person really, without their knowledge. We also are seeing a lot of AI-generated images. AI is becoming so much more common these days that we've seen cases where there's like a high school age kid taking completely appropriate images of kids or their classmates and then using AI to undress them. So with this in mind, one thing that's important for you guys as parents is to be mindful of what you're posting online. If you're posting your kids, obviously we don't want to think about anyone doing anything harmful with that image, but if you're posting it on a publicly visible page, keep in mind that there are bad actors out there that might want to do something inappropriate with those images. And here's an example of how easy it is to use AI to pretend to be someone you're not. The first picture is of me just sitting at my desk. I used a free app, and it took me about 5 minutes to make myself a teenage boy and like a 11, 12-year-old girl. So when kids are talking to people online that they've never met in person, it's impossible for them to know that this person is actually another 13-year-old girl that they're talking to. They could easily be a 56-year-old man living in their mother's basement. And then this is just another one of my coworkers. We turned him into a teenage boy as well. And then here we are on a beach vacation. Like, very easy to portray yourself as something you're not, and in a place that you're not as well. So they might say, oh, I live far away, like I live in California. You think the kid that might lure the child into a sense of safety, thinking, oh, I'm never gonna see this person in real life. They might feel more safe, which they shouldn't, sending things. And then another example of AI. So only one of these images is real. I'm gonna give you guys a few seconds to kind of take a look at these, and then I'm gonna ask if you guys can figure out which one the real one is. And all of them look pretty realistic, right? So by a show of hands, how many of you think the real image is the like observatory looking thing in the top left? Okay. How many of you think the real image is the guy with a dog in the tent? How many of you think the real image is the one in the center with the couple? And what about the food? And then how many of you think the mountain landscape is real? Okay, so the only real image is the one of the observatory. Everything else is completely AI generated, completely fake. So this is just an example to show you how easy it is to make something appear to be different than what it is. So the possession of AI generated child pornography is illegal as well. This is actually a recent statute, a recent change in the law. It's only been since 2024 when House Bill 993 came into place, which made it illegal to have AI-generated child pornography. So that means if you have these inappropriate images of that look like children, even if it's not a real child, it's still illegal to possess. And then we're also going to talk about some resources for what do you do when your images are shared. There's things out there through NCMEC, such as Project Take It Down. Essentially, Project Take It Down is a free service that helps remove or stop the online sharing of nude, partially nude, or sexually explicit images or videos taken of you when you are under 18 years old. You can use the service anonymously, and you won't have to send your images or videos to anyone. Take It Down works on public or unencrypted online platforms that have agreed to participate. So NCMEC or Project Take It Down will do a lot of the work for you. They will search for your images online and send out like requests to the places they find them to take the images down for you. And so Take It Down is specifically for people who have images or videos of themselves nude, partially nude, or in sexually explicit situations taken when you're under 18. For example, maybe they sent a nude picture to someone, but now they're threatening them, or it's been posted somewhere. I had a case that I worked personally where the victim at the time was in her early 20s. Her Snapchat account had gotten hacked, and she had images on there from when she was 15, 16 years old that would be considered CSAM, and then these images got posted online. So this kind of stuff, even if you only send it to one person, you never know who's going to get access to your account and who's going to get access to those pictures. And this was like years later that she was still finding the pictures of herself online. So the way Take It Down works is every file, whether it's an image, a video, a PowerPoint, a Word document, has what's called a hash value. And a hash value basically serves as a unique digital fingerprint for that file. So NCMEC will take the hash values of the explicit images or videos, and it will search for those hash values throughout the internet, wherever they may be posted. And so I have a slide of QR codes here, specifically with a link to Project Take It Down, some FAQs about Take It Down, and then our cyber tip line as well, where members of the public can submit or report things that they've seen online. So if you see your child has been the victim of like an online crime, one way you can report this is with the NCMEC cyber tip line. And then if you guys want to take a picture of this slide, that's fine. I'm going to send Kathy a PDF of all of like the resources that I'm including so you guys can go back to them at a later point. And so now we're going to talk about the sharing of images between an adult and juvenile. So generally, an adult isn't going to ask a kid, hey, send me an inappropriate picture right off the bat from the first time they meet them. They're going to groom them. So grooming is actually another recent law in Georgia where it's now illegal to do this. Grooming is a manipulative tactic used by sexual abusers to gain access to gain trust of, and control potential victims and their caregivers as well. 1 in 7 minors have reported sharing something that they've never shared before with an online friend. Oftentimes, kids feel safer online talking about these kinds of things because they don't have to see the face of the person that they're talking to. Like, it allows them the illusion of anonymity. Online grooming is when a suspect builds an emotional connection with a child or teenager through the internet, often with the intention of exploiting them sexually. So 1 in 3 minors report meeting some of their closest friends online. And 1 in 4 kids, 9 to 17, have reported that they've had a conversation of the like flirting or interest in dating type variety with people they only knew online. Because grooming starts with the building of foundation and trust with the victim, many of these kids don't realize it's happening as it's going on. 2 in 3 kids have reported an online only contact that has asked them to move from like a public chat to a private conversation on a different platform. So 2 out of 3, that's the majority of kids using the internet. So this is the code section for grooming. As we said before, minor means any person under the age of 18. It has to have a pattern of conduct or communication. So a pattern could be a series of messages over days, months, weeks. It could be a series of messages over the course of a night. It just kind of depends on the totality of the circumstances. In order to be charged with this, a person also has to be over the age of 18 and no less than 4 years older than the alleged victim when they commit the offense. This person also has to knowingly and intentionally engage in a pattern of conduct or communication, either in person, third party, through an electronic device, social media, DM, text message, etc., to gain access to, gain the compliance of, to prepare, persuade, induce, or coerce a minor to engage in either a sexual offense or in trafficking of a person for sexual servitude. So it's not a defense to prosecution that no sex offense or trafficking offense actually occurred. Grooming is merely about the attempt. And this can also be charged either if either the victim or the offender lives within Georgia. So even if the offender is someone living across the country, they can still be charged here in Georgia if the victim lives here and was here at the time the offense occurred. And then you'll also see this come into play if everyone's seen like the Dateline show, To Catch a Predator, etc. Those are taken. Those undercover chats are not a defense to prosecution as well. Just because the person they're talking to isn't actually a child, if they believe the person to be a child, they can be charged. So next we've got the code section for electronically furnishing obscene material to minors. So a person commits this offense if they know or have good reason to know that the character of the material furnished, they electronically furnish it to an individual who they know or should have known as a child. So if they send anything explicit that's not like for educational or artistic type purposes to anyone that they know or should know is a child, that's a crime. And then there's a couple of exceptions to this rule. Typically, this is charged as a misdemeanor of high and aggravated nature, but there are some mitigating circumstances that might make it just a regular misdemeanor. So if at the time of the offense, the minor receiving the obscene materials was at least 14, the receipt of the materials was with their permission, and the defendant was 18 or younger, it could be charged as just a regular misdemeanor. So some red flags to look out for grooming as far as parents go. If you're reading your child's conversations, going through their phone, if you see these kinds of things, definitely keep your guard up. So if the person your child is talking to is asking to keep the relationship or the conversation secret, that's a huge red flag. This includes asking them to delete conversations, asking them to hide and only message like when they're alone, things like that. Anyone making suggestive or sexual comments, like a lot of times grooming, it won't start with the, hey, send me a dirty picture. They'll kind of like introduce the concept slowly. Maybe they'll add a JK or just kidding, something like that afterwards, just to kind of test the waters. So keep in mind that this could be an early stage or an early sign of that grooming. Asking about their sexual background, that's completely inappropriate. No good reason why anyone, an adult, should be doing that with a child. Sending links to suggestive images, to suggestive memes, or even outright porn, obviously that's a huge red flag. And then also only using certain apps for contact. So one thing that we see is these kids are playing on like Roblox, or they're on Xbox, Minecraft, or something like that. And then they'll meet someone who says, hey, message me on Kik, or download Signal or Telegram and message me here. That's a big red flag if they only want to use certain apps, because a lot of those messaging apps are known for their secrecy and like encrypted messages. And why would you be asking a child to hide their messages? And then also, If they only chat at certain times or when others aren't around, like if you notice your kid is only talking to someone when you're not around, that's definitely a red flag. Um, and if you're reading these conversations between your kids and other people, and the person on the other end is like, oh, I can't talk now, I'm not alone, that's definitely a red flag as well. If the person they're talking to tries to set conditions on the relationships, like, oh, you're only my friend if you send me a picture, or if you do XYZ, that's obviously a huge red flag. And then sending unexpected gifts. A lot of times people will do this to try to get the child to feel like they owe them. Like they'll send them money on Cash App, they'll order them something on Amazon, and then when they do ask for that picture, they'll be like, well, you kind of owe me because I gave you all these things. And they'll try to guilt the child into sending them the inappropriate material. This is an example of an undercover conversation that a detective I know had with a suspect. Um, Over here, the Schweiger is the suspect. UC is the undercover operative. You can see here the suspect is asking the kid to make sure they're like deleting their conversations and trying to get them onto Kick, because no one can get their messages. Kick is an app that I see a lot personally in the cases that I've worked. We get a lot of cyber tips from Kick. They're cracking down on the CSAM being sent on their platform. Kick is one of those red flag apps to keep an eye out for, because it's basically just a messaging app. Um, like I said, we see a lot of CSAM being sent on Kick, and I've heard stories of suspects that I've interviewed who have said they were sexually exploited themselves as a child on Kick. So our response, some things we take into consideration: how old are the involved parties? When we're looking at these kinds of things, if we have a 19-year-old sending explicit images to a 15-year-old, obviously that's not okay. But if we have a 19-year-old exchanging explicit images with a 9-year-old, that's a little bit more like predatory intent. Me personally, I've had cases with a victim as young as 9 who was receiving these inappropriate images, and I think the youngest one I've had where the child was sending the images was 10. So we're seeing these kids like younger and younger getting tricked into doing these things. The other thing we have to take into consideration is, are the images CSAM? We also have to identify the suspect. So if we have any kind of technology-based crime, getting things such as phone numbers, usernames, email addresses, screen names, all that kind of stuff is extremely valuable to law enforcement, because a lot of times we can trace that stuff back to, if not the human it came from, the location it came from. And then also law enforcement needs to take steps to preserve the accounts as soon as possible. Like, for example, how many of y'all have used Snapchat? So if you've used Snapchat, you know that oftentimes the messages or pictures that you send disappear, depending on your settings, either instantly or within 24 hours, unless someone manually saves them. Sometimes Snapchat is able to go back after the fact and send us these things after the images have been like deleted from the device. But a lot of times they aren't. So getting this information to law enforcement as soon as possible so we can preserve the accounts is extremely important, because that way, even if it gets deleted by the user, by the suspect, or even by the kid, we can still access it and we can still act on it. Sometimes law enforcement will take over an account of a child to try to capture the suspect or maybe get more information if we don't have enough info to actually identify them. This is rare. I haven't actually done this myself, but it is something that's an option. We want to preserve the evidence and secure the devices. So if you go through your child's phone and you found that they have sent inappropriate pictures of themselves on that phone's yours now. The kid doesn't necessarily need access to that phone to delete it before you get a chance to make a report, or to warn the suspect or anything like that. And then also, don't delete the images. I realize as a parent, it is extremely traumatizing to have to see those kinds of pictures of your child, but law enforcement is going to need to see them to verify that they are CSAM so we can take the investigative steps. And then also, you'll need the hash values from those images to send to NCMEC if you want to do the Project Take It Down. And you can do Project Take It Down even if you don't know if your images have been shared, just as like a precautionary measure. So the next thing we're going to talk about is sextortion, which is kind of what's become what sexual extortion has been shortened into. We see sextortion in a variety of formats. The two most common sextortion types that we see are either sextortion for sexual gratification or sextortion for financial motivation. So it's not uncommon for young people to be threatened with explicit images, either of themselves or with images that people might believe are them. So as I talked about before with AI, I've seen, or we've had cases where people are taking these perfectly innocent pictures of kids and undressing them, or like photoshopping someone's face onto a naked body. Even if it's not actually the child themselves, if it's presented to be them, that can be extremely harmful for them. 1 in 5 teenagers have reported having a lived experience with sextortion, and also 1 in 5 report knowing someone, not including themselves, that has had that same experience. The nature of the demands tends to differ between the genders. Females typically tend to be asked for more images of themselves, whereas males typically tend to be asked for money. 1 in 3 victims of sexual extortion report that they knew their perpetrator online. This means 2 of 3 of them only knew them on the internet. They didn't know them in real life. The risk of online sexual extortion is increasing. This is driven in part by increasing rates of financially motivated sexual extortion, with roughly 1 in 5 victims being extorted for money. And technology plays a huge role in sextortion. Respondents, about 61% of them knew their sextortionists almost exclusively online, and nearly all of the threats made, about 94% of them, were on digital formats, either social media, direct message, things like that. This is harmful for kids because, as we said before, it's embarrassing for someone to have to go through this. Unfortunately, we have seen this lead to cases of self-harm and or suicide. 85% of young adults and teens have reported that embarrassment helped or stopped them from reaching out for help. And these are some quotes from Thorn from some people that have experienced this. It felt like someone was not only invading my privacy, but also mentally and almost physically assaulting me when I saw the images go public. An 18-year-old said that my mom told me it wouldn't be the end of the world if it did happen, and we would get through it. And reaching out is the best thing you can do. The people around you want what's best for you, and they may be angry at first, but in the end, they will not love you any less. They might even gain some respect for your courage. So sextortion for sexual gratification usually involves an offender coercing a minor to create and send a sexually explicit image. And then once they have that image, they'll turn around and say, all right, now I want you to send me more. Otherwise, I'm going to expose you. I'm going to post this online. I'm going to send this to your followers, send it to your parents, etc. These types of offenders are typically seeking sexual gratification from the images rather than any kind of financial gain. And then we have the financially motivated sextortion. Offenders will coerce a minor to create and send sexually explicit material, and then once they have that material, they'll threaten to expose, distribute the image if the child doesn't send them money. Usually, we'll see them ask for gift cards, for Cash App transactions, for Venmo, and a lot of times they're using like hacked Cash App or Venmo accounts, so it's harder to trace it back to the person who was actually doing this. We've even seen requests for wire transfers and requests for crypto as well. And these offenders are trying to do this to make money, not necessarily for sexual gratification. Between 2021 and 2023, the online enticement and sextortion reports to NCMEC have tripled. And as of 2023, there have been 186,819 reports, according to Thorn. So the victims of the financially motivated sextortion are typically older teenagers, around 14 to 17. And these offenders are also usually located outside of the US. We've seen them come out of Western Africa, out of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, out of countries where it's very hard for law enforcement to actually catch them because there's Not always extradition. There's international treaties and stuff that comes into play. And then serving legal processes on someone who's outside of the US is difficult as well. Between October of 21 and March of 2023, the FBI and Homeland Security investigations received over 13,000 reports of online financial sextortion. This involved at least 12,600 victims, mostly boys, and led to at least 20 suicides. Between October of 2022 and March of 2023, the FBI observed at least a 20% increase in reporting of financially motivated sextortion of minors compared to the same time period of the previous year. So these kinds of things are getting reported more and more. So this is the code section that kind of goes over child pornography or child sexual abuse material. A child is defined as anyone under 16 years here, and an identifiable child is anyone who was a child at the time the visual depiction was created or modified, and who's recognizable as an actual person. A person commits the offense of computer or electronic pornography if such a person intentionally or willfully compiles, enters into, transmits by computer or other electronic device, creates any one of these sexually explicit images, or if you cause or allow these images to be created on a computer or electronic device, or if you buy, sell, receive, exchange, or distribute any kind of advertisement or a child's name or personal information about a child for the purpose of that child engaging in sexual activity. This is punished as a felony. But it does have a Romeo and Juliet clause that makes it a misdemeanor based off of age, consent, and intentions. 40% of children reported that they have been approached by someone they knew only online in order to befriend and manipulate them. 54% of minors believe online grooming is a common experience for kids their age. 45% of minors reported contact with their perpetrator on multiple platforms. A 17-year-old female who experienced this said, "I think it's normal for people to connect with people online that they haven't met in person because social media is such a big part of people's lives that people will start to meet online and form bonds." A 12-year-old female said, "Well, I knew that I would never meet this person, so it made me comfortable to talk about anything. It made me feel excited. It was much more convenient for me because I'm not allowed to date." So this is another thing as parents that's important for you, is to set those boundaries. Like, this girl wasn't allowed to date, so she tried to find a workaround. So make sure those expectations with your children are clear and that you're monitoring their activity. Many victims in sextortion cases feel like they have no choice but to respond to the messages that they're getting. Very few of them will actually just stop responding and try to call them on their bluff. More than 2 in 3 victims in a 2017 survey reported that they attempted to comply with the demands to make the threat stop. However, for the majority, the threats continued even after they gave the suspect what they wanted. And 68% said that the threats became more frequent in the aftermath. Sextortion threats are not hollow, and they have significant impact on victims. Victims have reported that their experiences have led them to change schools, change work, and even home addresses, and led them to seek support from medical professionals. And sadly, some of these cases also led to victims committing suicide. 84% of victims didn't seek help as they felt too embarrassed or ashamed. So kids make mistakes. It happens. 1 in 5 teens ages 13 to 17 have shared nudes, and 1 in 7 between 9 and 17 have reported sending them. 47%, so almost half of them, have shared that they felt positive feelings immediately after sharing, and then 36% of them reported feeling shame or guilt. And images can be spread once they're out there, leading to cyberbullying and suicide. And once these images are out there, they don't go away. They can come back years later, even after you think they're all gone. So it's important to have these conversations with your kids, let them know that obviously this kind of stuff isn't okay, but make sure that you're still a safe space for them to come forward so they have that support if, God forbid, something like this does happen. So our response to sextortion, be sensitive. Obviously, I'm sure there will be some sort of repercussions for a child doing something they're not allowed to do, but it's important to try not to blame the child. Like, they were manipulated. Their brains aren't fully developed yet. Do your best to preserve evidence, secure devices and accounts, and also get usernames and passwords. If you're reporting to law enforcement's going to need usernames for everyone involved, both the child and the suspect. And then we're also going to need passwords to any devices that the child communicated with this person on. Also, make sure that the child doesn't have access to that account anymore. Like, for example, an Instagram account. You can log into that Instagram account from any electronic device, from a computer, from an iPad, from a phone. So, if you take the phone away because the child has sent inappropriate Instagram messages on their phone, but they still have access to a computer, because schools these days are giving kids Chromebooks, make sure that the child doesn't have access to that Instagram account still. So if you have their passwords, you can change their password to prevent them from getting in and deleting any kind of evidence. And then again, as I said earlier, don't delete the inappropriate images because law enforcement will need them for evidence. And then also they'll be needed for NCMEC's Take It Down if you wanted to take a safeguard to prevent the spread of the images. And then also report to law enforcement as soon as possible. That way law enforcement can start the evidence preservation process. We can preserve accounts. Like when I get a case that involves anything having to do with an online suspect, the very first thing I do before I even call the victim or call the family, if there's a username, I go online and I preserve that account so nothing can get deleted. Be aware of apps or games that contain internal messaging or chats. So almost every game out there contains some sort of chat feature these days. A common one that we see is Roblox. Roblox has a direct messaging platform or capability in it, although I believe there are restrictions depending on the age of the child. Roblox doesn't allow the sharing of images or videos, though. It's just text communication. But a lot of times that's something we're seeing is these predators are meeting kids on apps that are technically not necessarily like age appropriate for them, and then they're luring them to these other dangerous apps like Kik, like Telegram or Signal, where it's harder to track their conversations. Monitor the conversations that your kids are having and take note if there's anyone asking them to move to a different application. And as I said before, Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, Zangi are some examples of encrypted messaging apps. And then also as parents, it's important for you guys to educate yourselves on what's out there. What's out there today is not necessarily what's going to be out there tomorrow. There's always new things popping up, and it's your responsibility to try to stay on top of what's out there these days. Apps that we're seeing a lot of exploitation on, like I said, Roblox. Predators are meeting these kids and transitioning them from Roblox to other apps. Discord we're seeing a lot of, and then Wiz especially is a new one that I've started to see a lot of cases with as well. Wiz is basically like they call it a friend finder app, but it looks like a dating app for kids where they try to meet people their own age online and they talk to each other. And I've had cases personally where a girl met a guy on Wiz, they started talking, and then that night he was driving 2 hours to come meet her at her house for them to engage in some inappropriate activity. Account takeovers. So the sole fact that the suspect is communicating with someone who's not a child is not a defense to prosecution. So if we have an undercover officer or an officer has taken over a child's account, if they believe themselves or like reasonably believe themselves to be communicating with a child, they can be charged still. And this is what allows us to do those undercover proactive operations. So account takeovers can only be done by specifically trained personnel. It can't be done by like a parent taking over their child's account to try to trick the suspect into revealing more information about themselves. That's something that we've seen. That can hurt the credibility of the evidence that we do have from the child, because then there becomes a question of how do we know that the child said this versus the adult. It's a challenging thing to do because it requires the child no longer having access to that account. And then also we as law enforcement, if we were to do this, we would have to get consent from a parent or guardian. And the child loses all access to that account. The password's reset, so they can't get into it. Like I said before, I've never done this before. Typically, we don't take over the child's account. It's best practice to try to use what they've already done to try to identify the suspect. Some safeguards that you guys can do. There are parental control apps out there, and children have no right to privacy. So if you install some kind of parental control apps, I know some cell providers, like cell phone companies, will do them. I think Apple has a good system where you can have like parental controls on there where the child has to get parental permission before they can download any kinds of new apps. Parents need to know their children's passwords. Like I said before, children, have no right to privacy. And obviously, you know your child best. Every child is different. So it's up to you guys to kind of figure out that balance between trying to give them some sort of the illusion of privacy, but also you still need to have access in case something were to happen. Be familiar with your child's online presence, their Instagram accounts, their Snapchat accounts. I don't know if kids have Facebook anymore, but those kinds of things. And then parents also need to be aware of what you're posting about your children. If your Facebook account, for example, is completely publicly visible and you're posting family pictures, those images are out there for anyone to take and manipulate and do with what they please. So it's probably in your best interest if you are posting these kinds of things to make sure your accounts are private, stuff's only visible to your friends or trusted individuals. And then also set up privacy settings on your child's social media accounts if you do allow them to have social media that make their account private. So like a private Instagram account, for example, in order for someone to see their content, the Instagram user would have to, like your child would have to accept them and then put in safeguards and procedures in place for like who are people you're allowed to accept. I think some apps also restrict access if the user is known to be under 18, because when you download the app and you sign up and you sign the user license agreement, you have to enter an age usually. Sometimes kids under 18 will be like unlisted basically, so predators have a harder time of finding them. As law enforcement, we have several web-based systems that allow us to easily share past reports, because a lot of times what we're seeing is these offenders, it isn't their first time doing this. I have cases where I'll get a case that a guy or a child reported that someone met her online and did some inappropriate things with her, and then I'll search some of the databases that we have and discover that, oh, he's done this 4 or 5 times before. And these databases are between like law enforcement nationwide and even international. So if these bad actors were to move across jurisdictions, there's different ways that they can still, like, because we share these reports, they can still potentially be tied to their present actions. And NCMEC partners with all sorts of electronic service providers, from social media to internet companies to cell phone providers, various apps and websites, to get and distribute those cyber tips to investigate the proliferation of the CSAM. The combination of monitoring your child's activity and also being involved in your children's lives is ultimately going to be the best safeguard. So let's say, heaven forbid, something like this happens and you have to make a report. Here's what you can do. So you would contact the ACCPD non-emergency line unless your child or you are in immediate danger. Preserve the evidence. As I said before, preserve the devices. Take the phones away, take the iPads away. And if you need to, if it's like an Instagram account or something, change the password so the child can't get in and delete anything. Because a lot of times what we're seeing is these kids, because they're manipulated, they don't realize that what's happened is wrong. And we'll see them try to defend the perpetrator, try to defend the predator, and protect them by deleting their messages. Get the passwords for the devices or for the device that was used to engage in the contact with the suspect. And then also take screenshots yourself just in case somehow these images or the conversations get deleted. Take screenshots of the messages, of the suspect account profiles. That way law enforcement can preserve them as soon as possible. But don't take screenshots of anything that capture your child doing sexually inappropriate activity, because we would not want you guys to be producing child pornography. And then report it to law enforcement as soon as possible so we can take those preservation steps. So here are some resources that are available to you guys as parents. We've got NCMEC, some stuff through the FBI, some information on extortion. Thorn, which is a nonprofit that seeks to end the proliferation of CSAM and human trafficking. There's also NCMEC's Project Take It Down, as we already talked about. And then I did, or Kathy did print out some handouts that I sent that you guys will get on your way out. And then there's also a link. They're from the ICAC Task Force Resources for Parents. And those kinds of things are updated and kept up to date. As far as things such as education, what apps are out there, some trends we're seeing, things like that. And then locally, the Cottage is our local sexual assault and child advocacy center. They also offer resources for educational purposes. They also offer support services such as counseling for children or caregivers who have experienced anything like this. And there's a QR code for their website as well. And then this is my information. Thank you guys for being here tonight. My business card is that QR code. And then I also have a link on my little business card to that ICAC task force website with the resources for you guys. So that's all that I have for you guys tonight. Thank you guys so much for coming. I guess we've got some time, so does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Gotcha. First off, thank you so much. This has been super informative. I had a question. So I have the screen time password for a few of my guys who they struggle with looking at pornography. So we've set up screen time on their phones, and all of them have at some point been Apple screen time just it doesn't work 100% of the time. It messes up quite a bit. And so they'll end up basically just having a night where they relapse because they had good boundaries, but they weren't actually good boundaries. So do you have recommendations or know where a good resource to find security? Because if people my age are getting past this stuff, that's, I don't know, it's a question I have.
Yeah, the reality is kids are smart. They're way smarter than we give them credit for. They're unfortunately probably going to find a way around safeguards, but we can only do what we can do. As far as a resource for getting around the screen time limitations, I don't know of anything specifically off the top of my head. However, I do know that there are other apps that can be downloaded, especially if this is a willing agreement, this is adults trying to stop themselves from this addiction. There are apps that you can download to limit your own screen time that will block out specific apps and websites. I've seen adults use them for like ADHD management or focus, when you're working on a paper or something like that. You don't want distractions, or you're working from 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you don't want distractions. There are apps where you can download and set those parameters, so that might be something to look into. I just unfortunately don't have any names of good recommendations myself. And then that's all I've got, unfortunately. Any other questions over here?
Wait just a second. If you were going to choose an app on your phone for your child to communicate with you rather than buying them a phone, which one would you suggest? Or would you suggest that's not a good idea?
I would suggest that's not a good idea. I don't know if this is still a thing, but I remember seeing a few years ago, there was not necessarily a full phone, but I think it was called Firefly. It was a device that it basically was not a smartphone. So like maybe a flip phone or something like that could be an option because it doesn't allow them to go on the internet and might still allow you to communicate with them. But I don't unfortunately have anything specifically that I would recommend. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm going to send Kathy the slides that have the resources on them for her to email out to you guys. And that's all I've got.
All right. I might just take another couple minutes to see if, in addition to questions, if you still had questions you could ask, but also if any of you have experienced something that you might offer to the rest of us that would be like here's something I've learned, or here's something I've experienced, or here's something that's helped us and our family or helped with our children. So if anybody, because we do have a little bit of time, it's kind of the collective wisdom, the wisdom of the room. So if you have something like that, I'll bring the mic to you, or actually you do. I'll stay here and you. All right. Because I would imagine there's some wisdom in this room.
Hey, okay, so to answer your question, you can get, like, this might be a church idea. You could get a brick for the youth group room, and it could be something that's like in the youth pastor's drawer or something. And if someone wants to brick certain sites, it is a physical lock. You have 5 emergency unlocks, but then you're done. Like, you can't request more. And then to unlock your phone, you would have to physically be in the room with the brick and tap it again to unlock those apps or things. So like my husband has YouTube bricked because he noticed that YouTube was constantly sending him sexually explicit ads. So it's just bricked.
Wow.
And if we want to use YouTube, we use it on my phone because for some reason, if you set your phone to female, they don't send you sexually explicit ads.
Mhm.
So maybe also you could just set your gender in your phone to female if you're a man and struggling with something like that. The other thing is, I think this presentation itself being shared in a youth group would be super helpful. I didn't know about all these resources when I was in college, and I had to walk with a sorority sister through revenge porn. Thankfully, her parents were wealthy and could hire a lawyer, and were able to like kind of nip that in the bud and come at that person, that man, with the full, act of the law, but it was still completely traumatizing for her. She was afraid of where she was living, and he was using a lot of the tactics listed there, including threatening his own life if, certain things. So I think just a couple of those things, like I think knowledge is power, and talking to our children about what was listed, like explaining this is what sextortion might look like at an age appropriate level. So I think if they're old enough to have a phone and be on the internet, they're old enough to know about the topics listed in that presentation.
Good stuff. All right. This is good. This is exactly what I wanted. Anybody else? Jesse. And then if you law enforcement guys in the back have anything, you chime in as well.
So we have, teenage boys and a daughter who's 10. So technology is in our house. They're homeschooled. Laptops are needed for schooling and that sort of thing. And so often, every couple of months or so, I'll take their computers and I will spend hours just digging and digging and digging. And it's inconvenient. It's 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night and I got to go to work the next day. But I don't stop until I've got through all of their history.
Amen, brother.
And then I just wipe it. So the next time I go back, I'm not digging back through records I've already dug through. So I'll just delete everything. And they know it's going to happen. So they need to have their school passwords and everything readily available. And it's just what we do.
Good
Just
job,
have to do
Dad.
it.
Good job, Dad. Love it.
I had a question, I guess, just for anyone in the room. But are there parents in the room who have tried? I'm not a parent, but I don't know. Maybe one day I will be. That's why I'm here. And I guess like it's just a conversation I'll have with my friends where it's like we'll talk about if we had kids, like would we want them to be, where on the spectrum between completely off the grid versus giving them some slack and giving them when they are showing trustworthy. But I don't know. I guess I was curious if anyone had an experience of like completely, or maybe on like the farther end of the off the grid spectrum, and if that's worked, if that's shown to be helpful, or if it's kind of made them feel like they're the only one in their friend group that like doesn't have the same things that everyone else has.
Great question. Gina, and then, yeah, we got several up, and I want to, maybe McClure, you need to chime in here too.
Let's see, how old am I? 31. When I was 8, my parents only had one computer in our entire house in the family room, but I would regularly play with my little neighbors who were also little girls. And we jokingly Googled boobs at 8 years old and saw pornography for the first time at a friend's house. So it's not just about like the rules in your own home.
So, yeah, I have 7 children. 6 of them are girls. One is a little boy. A couple things that had happened, which I was really glad we had this presentation. It is true, you could take one device away, but if they have other devices, they're going to find stuff. But I definitely did Little House on the Prairie on a couple of my kids who needed to have zero access from some decisions they were making, to the point where I went to the school and showed them that even with the supposed firewalls on these Chromebooks that Oconee schools are giving, that our kids can find pretty much anything that they want to find. So I turned that Chromebook in, and this particular child of mine was pencil paper for an entire semester, was going into a second semester. And then the child said, okay, I got this. It's going to be fine. But I had the assistant principal monitoring, I had everybody monitoring. I'm like, you can give this computer back, but every single one of us is going to be looking at that, looking at the history. Like, we're not having this. This is nonsense. And you guys should not be. And this child at the time was 10 years old, 10. So this was a problem. I had to take my child to therapy and do all the things. I'm like, well, too young to be seeing some of the things that the child was seeing, and had to have conversations at an age that I did not feel was appropriate to have those conversations. So the positive part of that is, yeah, we went total pencil paper. Yes, it was embarrassing. Yes, all the things. But at the end of the day, this child has become extremely aware and actually self-reports to me. And this is years later, and will say, you know what, I think I should be leaving my laptop at school or in my backpack till you get home, whatever. And is very, very open and honest. And we've had a lot of, great prayers and, just deliverance prayers and all kinds of prayers about things that the child was exposed to that they weren't actually looking for to begin with. And literally finding stuff on YouTube and even Amazon searches and weird things, it's crazy. But another child got the phone taken away, and totally that time I was like, yeah, it's all Little House for you too. So, you're zero access to everything. And I did that for an entire year. This child was 15 at the time. So definitely in high school, not even a flip phone, nothing. I'm like, you know what? I'll figure out your schedule in the morning and afternoon, and people will be there to pick you up. So we're not doing this. And yes, was the child embarrassed? Absolutely. But after that full year, this particular child also came to me with a handwritten contract about, if I could get my phone back, these are the things that I would do. And to this day, that's been over a year and a half ago, this child will turn that phone in 10 o'clock every night. I have the passwords. This child is like, you can read anything you want. I don't have anything to hide from you. And Mom, I don't ever want to hide stuff from you again, because I want to live in truth and I don't want to live in lies. So
good. Love it. Because you're after character, not just behavior modification. You're after the heart. Up here, do you have something, or did it get covered? Okay.
She could.
I mean, it just goes along with what they said, but it also all in, I mean, not to sound, I don't know, high and mighty, but how we raise them and equip them, right? If we're going to send them out into the world, I think that we have to be able to, they know the rules, they know the boundaries, and they have to be able to self-monitor. Our daughter's admittedly not very good at that. She likes to sneak on YouTube when she can. She's not looking up anything bad, but she just clicks through videos and you just never know it's going to pop up. We've had to restrict that in our house. But she goes to spend the night at friends' houses who we know have older siblings. And then, there's who knows what can happen there. So we just have to tell them, teach them what's right and what's wrong to come to us. it always sticks out in my head. A pastor at our old church that we used to go to, he led our small group, and we asked him one time how his kids went to public school. And it was like, how did you choose between homeschool and private school and public school? And he said, we tried it all. The homeschool didn't work for them. Private school was just as bad as public school. It was just, raise them up in the way they should go and teach them what's right and wrong. And they did that, and public school worked for them. It's just putting that stuff in place.
Spiritual warfare we're involved in, guys. He's the prince of the power of the air. All right, anybody else?
Something that we experienced through somebody teaching at our parenting milestone was one child did not have a phone. 3 girlfriends had a phone. They're driving down the road. One girl is trying to have a conversation with all of the others, and the others are sitting there on their phone. And so when mom got that child home, how did that make you feel? How do you feel about that? And so she said, yeah, and I don't want that.
Amen.
So that was a good parent.
Yeah.
But those other kids doesn't know how to communicate.
Well, I'm proud of each of you for being here. Good job. You're being equipped. We're all in this together. Jess has a...
There's an app for that.
There's another app called Focus, Focus. If you guys are interested in the brick thing she was talking about, it's like a free app for that.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, let's keep this going. So the value of the body of Christ is we're in this together, and you have a need, call upon a brother or sister, get prayer, get counsel, get input, because that's humility. That's what I'm preaching on Sunday from Proverbs, humility versus pride. Humility is teachable, gets counsels, open to criticism, and doesn't think they have all the answers. And when we are humble, we get grace. He gives grace to the humble. All right, I'll pray us out, and then you can fellowship. And then if you have kids over in the children's ministry or youth ministry, make sure you're there at 8 o'clock. So we got 15 minutes to fellowship. Lord, thank you again for tonight, for the presentation, for the resources here. God, I just pray blessings over our law enforcement, blessing over the detectives, all those that do that hard work. God, we pray that you would expose darkness, bring things into the light, that there might be repentance, healing, cleansing. And we pray for every family, every child represented with the parents here tonight, for your Holy Spirit protection, the moving into their hearts, that when they sin, they will be convicted by your Spirit to bring about repentance and ultimately a change of heart to where they love you and want to serve and obey you. We give it all to you tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for our tech team back there. Appreciate that, guys.